Okay, welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be diving in.
Today we are taking a deep dive into a stack of sources giving us a detailed snapshot of news and developments from India, specifically drawing from material dated June 12th, 2025.
Yeah, it's quite a mix we've got here.
It's a really rich and diverse collection. We've got everything from, the peak of international cricket drama and significant demographic shifts to the granular details of politics, foreign relations, economic updates, a truly startling true crime story, and a critical public health issue.
It really covers the spectrum.
Our mission with this deep dive, as always, is to sift through these headlines, extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, and help you understand what's truly significant and why it matters from the material you've shared.
Right. Unpacking it all.
We'll unpack these stories, connect some dots you might not have seen at first glance, and hopefully give you some surprising facts and insights along the way. Let's dive in.
Absolutely. What these sources highlight is just the incredible complexity and dynamism of a nation like India on any given day. You have global sporting events happening,
Right.
deep-seated societal trends unfolding, the machinery of governance and international relations at work, and these intensely personal human stories, both uplifting and, well, sometimes tragic.
Yeah.
Bringing them together like this provides a much more comprehensive, almost kaleidoscopic view than any single headline could offer.
Absolutely. And we're starting on a global stage with some high-stakes sporting drama. The World Test Championship Final, the iconic Lord's Cricket Ground.
That's right.
We have the report from the end of Day 1, June 12th, 2025.
That's right. The absolute pinnacle for Test cricket nations. And day one of this final between Australia and South Africa certainly delivered plenty tension.
Okay.
Australia won the toss and they elected to bat first. That decision usually signals confidence, wanting to set a big target, especially on a pitch that initially looked relatively, well, benign.
But it sounds like benign didn't last very long once South Africa's bowlers got going.
It didn't, no. South Africa's pace attack, which is known for its aggression and skill, they really turned the screws. They found just enough movement off the seam and maybe a little in the air to trouble the Australian batsmen. It was pretty relentless pressure from both ends.
And one bowler stood out.
Absolutely. Right at the forefront of that was Kagiso Rabada. He had a truly exceptional day.
He was particularly impactful early on, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Getting key wickets quickly.
He was devastating in one particular over, actually. He managed to dismiss two really key Australian batsmen, Usman Khawaja, who can be incredibly solid at the top,
Right.
and then Cameron Green, a powerful all-rounder, both falling in the same over to Rabada's pace and precision. I mean, that's a massive psychological blow so early in an innings.
Yeah, definitely sets a tone. And even someone known for his tenacity, like Labuschagne, he fell relatively cheaply.
Yes, Marnus Labuschagne, often considered Australia's most reliable, most difficult batsman to dislodge, he fell early to Marco Jansen.
Ah, Jansen.
Yeah, Jansen used his height and angle really effectively. So those early wickets, they set the tone and showed that Australia's decision to bat wasn't going to be an easy ride.
Steve Smith managed to put up some resistance, though.
Yeah.
Sounds like he dug in.
He did. Steve Smith, with his unique technique and immense experience, he managed to grind out a half century, 50 runs.
Great.
He looked like he might anchor the innings, maybe hold things together, but even he eventually succumbed, dismissed by the spinner Aiden Markram.
Markram. Isn't he mostly a batsman?
Exactly. Primarily a batsman who bowls a bit of off-spin. So getting Smith's wicket, that was a huge bonus for South Africa. Really shifted the momentum again.
So they reached a point where they had Smith building, but then it sounds like the classic test match collapse happened after the tea break.
Exactly. After tea, Australia's middle and lower order just crumbled. It was a rapid succession of wickets.
Who fell?
Players like Alex Carey, Mitchell Marsh. I think the outline said Webster, but it was Marsh captain Pat Cummins, Nathan Lyon, and Mitchell Starc. All dismissed in relatively quick order.
Wow.
Rabada just kept applying pressure, and the other bowlers supported him brilliantly. So Australia went from maybe looking at a competitive score to being bowled out for just 212.
212. That's significantly below par for a test final, especially batting first at Lord's, you'd think.
Oh, absolutely. A very disappointing total for them.
Okay, so Australia is all out for 212. Then it's South Africa's turn to bat. And it sounds like Australia's bowlers decided to return the favor pretty quickly, give them a taste of their own medicine.
Oh, they absolutely did. The Australian bowlers came out breathing fire. They exploited the conditions just as effectively, maybe even more so than South Africa had earlier.
Aggressive from the start.
Yeah, aggressive from the start, targeting the stumps, finding movement. Mitchell Starc, bowling with his characteristic pace and swing, he was particularly effective.
Who did he get?
He dismissed Aidan Markram early on, bowled him, and then got Tony DeZorzi. The outline had Rickleton, but I think it was DeZorzi caught it slip. Big wickets right at the start of the South African innings. Huge blow.
And the captain, Pat Cummins, got in on the act too, leading from the front.
He did. Pat Cummins bowled Wyan Mulder.
Right.
And then Josh Hazelwood, Mr. Consistent with his metronomic accuracy and finding that perfect length, he dismissed Tristan Stuggs.
So by the end of the day,
By the close of play on day one, South Africa found themselves in an even more precarious position than Australia had been earlier. They were 43 for 4.
43 for 4, wow.
Yeah, still 169 runs behind Australia's modest total, and with only 6 wickets remaining. I mean, that is a very, very deep hole to be in after just one day of a 5-day match.
So despite the initial look of the pitch, maybe seeming okay for batting, it clearly offered something for the bowlers from both sides. It wasn't flat.
Definitely not flat. While it might have looked decent from afar, there was enough seam movement, maybe some swing early on, for skilled bowlers to really make an impact. South Africa's pace attack did it, and then Australia's responded in kind.
So how's the match poised now?
It's incredibly finely balanced, maybe leaning just slightly Australia's way after that devastating spell late in the day. But, South Africa still has batsmen capable of fighting back. That first session of day 2 will be absolutely crucial. It could really determine who takes control.
You mentioned Kagiso Rabada earlier. His 5-wicket haul, that really defined the first innings, didn't it? 5 for 51, was it?
It was a performance of genuine class and, frankly, significance. He finished with those incredible figures, 5 wickets for 51 runs. I mean, taking 5 wickets in any test innings is a major achievement.
Sure.
But doing it in a World Test Championship final at Lord's, that's truly special. The sources even highlight his dismissal of Mitchell Starc as being in spectacular fashion, so it must have been quite a moment.
And this performance, it comes in the context of some recent personal challenges he's faced off the field.
Yes, that's a really important layer to his story on this day. It makes it even more remarkable. There had been quite a bit of public speculation about why he missed the latter part of the IPL, the Indian Premier League, earlier that year.
I remember that.
It was later revealed that he had actually served a suspension.
Suspension?
For what? The sources indicated it was for testing positive for a recreational drug, which, that's a significant setback for any professional athlete, both publicly and personally.
Absolutely. So to go from serving a suspension for something like that to coming back and delivering that kind of match-defining performance on arguably the biggest stage in Test cricket, I mean, that speaks volumes about his character and resilience.
It absolutely does. The sources note he returned to the field and was just letting his bowling do the talking. That phrase, I think, perfectly captures the focus and sheer determination required to put those personal difficulties aside and perform at such an elite level. And his celebration, apparently, after taking his 5th wicket, which also took him past Alan Donald's tally, was quite low-key, just quietly lifting the ball to acknowledge the milestone. Not flashy. Maybe composed, even understated, reflecting a focus on the game rather than himself, especially given what he'd just overcome.
Speaking of Alan Donald, that's a huge name in South African cricket. Where does this performance and surpassing his tally place Rabada now in that lineage of great South African pace bowlers?
It places him firmly among the pantheon of greats, no question. With this milestone, he became South Africa's 4th highest wicket taker in Test cricket history. And you think about South Africa's heritage of world-class fast bowlers, legends like Alan Donald himself, Sean Pollock, Dale Steyn, Morne Morkel, Vernon Philander. It's an incredible list.
Truly fearsome.
Absolutely. Rabada is now unquestionably seen as carrying the mantle of that legacy. He embodies the speed, the aggression, the skill that defines South African fast bowling, and his ability to consistently produce performances like this, especially under the immense pressure of a Test final, and after those personal setbacks, it just underscores how vital he is for South Africa's ambitions to get back to the very top of Test cricket.
His skills are just undeniable then, despite any off-field issues.
Absolutely. His bowling remains his primary identity, his strength. He is a vital asset to South Africa and recognized globally as one of the finest fast bowlers in the world, full stop. His contribution is absolutely key to any chance South Africa has in winning this final from here.
Okay, so let's wrap up the cricket then. What's the big takeaway here? Why should someone who might not follow cricket that closely care about the results of day one of this specific match? So what?
Well, look, this isn't just any cricket match. It's the World Test Championship final. It's the culmination of a 2-year cycle of competition representing the absolute peak of the longest format of the game, Test cricket.
Right, the ultimate test.
Exactly. It's a showcase of incredible skill, strategy, mental toughness, and physical endurance stretched over 5 days. It's where national pride is really on full display. But beyond that strategic battle between bat and ball, you've got these individual narratives like Rabada's return from suspension to dominate on the biggest stage. That adds such a profound human element.
Yeah.
Sport, even at this level, is filled with these compelling personal stories of triumph over adversity, performance under intense scrutiny, and just the sheer pursuit of excellence. It reminds us that behind all the statistics and scores are athletes with complex lives and journeys.
Well put. Okay, from the drama on the pitch, let's shift our focus to a much slower-moving but arguably even more significant story about a nation's future-shaped demographics. A recent UN report has some key findings about India's total fertility rate.
Yes, this report indicates a major demographic shift occurring in India, a really significant one. It found that the country's total fertility rate, or TFR, which is basically the average number of children a woman is expected to have in her lifetime, has dropped to 1.9 births per woman.
And that figure, 1.9, is significant because it's below the generally accepted replacement level, right?
Exactly. The replacement level is typically cited as 2.1 births per woman. That's the average number of children needed for one generation to perfectly replace itself, factoring in things like mortality before reproductive age and the fact that slightly more boys are born than girls.
Okay.
So, falling below 2.1 means that over the long term and assuming no major changes in migration, the population won't fully replace itself. This signals potential future challenges, particularly concerning an aging population and, eventually, a shrinking proportion of the working-age demographic relative to older people.
But hold on. The sources also mention that India's population is still projected to grow significantly in the coming years, hitting maybe 1.46 billion now in 2025 and potentially even 1.7 billion in 40 years. How do we square that circle, ongoing population growth, with a birth rate below replacement?
That's an excellent question, and it highlights a concept called demographic momentum. You see, India currently has a very large number of young people, a youth bulge from past higher fertility rates.
Right.
So even if each woman is having fewer children on average now, that's the lower TFR, the sheer number of women entering their reproductive years is still so massive that the overall population continues to grow for quite some time.
Oh, okay.
However, the rate of that growth is slowing down. The TFR of 1.9 is the signal for the future. It indicates that eventually this growth will plateau and the population could actually begin to decline. And crucially, the proportion of older people in society will significantly increase relative to younger age groups. It's like a pipeline effect. The changes take time to work through the system.
Got it. So what factors are contributing to this faster than expected decline in the TFR? What's driving it?
The report and other sources point to several key socioeconomic factors. A major driver is increased female literacy and educational attainment. Generally, women who are more educated tend to marry later and have fewer children as they pursue further studies and careers.
Makes sense.
Closely linked to that is the greater participation of women in the workforce. As women gain financial independence and prioritize professional goals, family size often becomes smaller. There are also shifting priorities among younger generations, both men and women, focusing more on careers, financial stability, and personal goals before, or sometimes even instead of, starting large families.
And migration plays a part too.
Migration also plays a role, yes. Many young, educated Indians are seeking opportunities for study and work abroad, and a significant number end up settling in other countries, so their potential contributions to India's birth rate are happening elsewhere. And finally, you can't ignore the impact of decades of government-supported family planning initiatives in India. These programs have consistently promoted the idea of smaller families, often focusing on a two-child norm, and they've clearly have a cumulative effect on fertility rates over a long period.
Yeah, it sounds like this isn't a uniform trend across the entire country, though. The sources mention significant regional differences.
There are, and this is a really critical nuance. The southern states of India, which generally rank higher on socioeconomic indicators like Literacy, healthcare access, urbanization, they've already achieved very low fertility rates, often well below this new national average of 1.9.
And that's causing some political concern down south.
It is, because the current allocation of parliamentary seats in India is based on population figures from older censuses. States with slower population growth, like those in the South, fear they'll be disadvantaged in future political representation compared to states where the population is still growing much faster. It's a real political worry for them.
And in contrast, other parts of the country still have much higher fertility rates.
Precisely. States like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar in the north, and even Meghalaya mentioned in the northeast, still report significantly higher fertility rates compared to the national average and especially compared to the southern states. This creates a fascinating and potentially challenging internal demographic divergence within India. You've got very different trends happening simultaneously.
And this has even prompted some calls from certain groups for people to have more children, hasn't it, to counter the trend?
Yes, the source mentions that. Figures associated with groups like the RSS, including its chief Mohan Bhagwat, have publicly expressed concern about the falling TFR. They've called on Hindu families specifically to consider having more children, arguing that a declining population poses risks and that increasing family size is necessary to maintain demographic balance from their perspective.
Okay, so given these trends, the overall decline, the regional differences, the potential challenges,
Yeah.
what are the experts quoted in the sources recommending? How should India actually address this?
Well, the key message coming from the experts isn't about panicking or necessarily trying to artificially force the TFR back up across the board. Instead, the focus absolutely must be on preparation.
Preparation for what?
Preparation for the inevitable consequence. India is rapidly heading towards an aging population. The country needs to proactively prepare now for the societal and economic impacts of that major demographic shift.
Okay, so what areas need attention?
They highlight several areas that require immediate attention and significant investment. Healthcare systems, for instance, need to be adapted to cater much more effectively to the needs of an older demographic, which often requires more specialized and long-term care.
Right.
Social infrastructure, things like accessible housing, proper elder care facilities, community support networks, needs to be built out significantly. And the labor market needs to consider how to adapt, perhaps to a smaller workforce entry rate eventually, and maybe how to support or integrate older workers if they want or need to continue working.
So it's less about stopping the decline and more about managing the consequences effectively, adapting to the new reality.
Exactly. The experts emphasize moving towards actionable policies. They suggest ensuring better access to comprehensive reproductive health care for everyone. That's crucial, regardless of the TFR, because it empowers individuals to make informed decisions about family planning, whatever those decisions are. They also advocate for policies supporting labor force integration, particularly for women, making sure that pursuing education or a career doesn't feel mutually exclusive with having children for those who desire both. And critically, developing robust social and financial policies specifically designed to support elderly citizens, ensuring their well-being, healthcare access, and financial security in retirement.
It sounds like the goal is basically demographic resilience, adapting policies to the reality of the changing population structure, rather than fighting the tide necessarily.
That's the core idea. Effective management of these demographic changes requires informed, forward-looking policies. Policies that balance the natural trends driven by socioeconomic progress with the absolute need to maintain overall economic dynamism and social stability for the entire population, from the youngest right through to the oldest.
So what here is that this statistic, a TFR of 1.9, is far, far more than just an abstract number on a UN report.
Oh, absolutely. It's a profound indicator of India's future trajectory. It directly impacts the future size and potentially the skills of the workforce, which is critical for economic growth. It creates a significant potential burden down the line for elderly care and pensions. It stirs up these complex political debates about regional representation and power balances. And it signals deep societal shifts in priorities, education levels, and the roles of women. This demographic change is a really long-term, powerful force that will reshape Indian society, economy, and politics for decades to come. It requires careful and timely planning starting right now.
Okay. From those long-term shifts in population, let's look at something fundamental to the present-day functioning of a large democracy: electoral integrity. The Stockholm International Conference on Electoral Integrity recently featured comments from India's Chief Election Commissioner.
Yes, India's chief election commissioner, Ginesh Kumar, was a prominent voice at this international conference. And his participation was particularly noteworthy because he was speaking on a global stage about the robustness of India's electoral system at a time when there have been some allegations raised by opposition parties back home in India.
What were those allegations about, specifically?
The allegations coming from some opposition parties within India have concerned things like voter data manipulation, essentially claiming that the electoral rolls might not be entirely accurate or that data has been improperly handled, which could potentially impact the fairness of elections. That's the crux of it.
So what was Commissioner Kumar's key message at the conference in response to this kind of climate? How did he address it?
Well, he strongly emphasized and defended what he called the rigorous and transparent nature of India's electoral roll preparation process. His central assertion was that the system is fundamentally sound and is specifically designed to prevent the kind of manipulation being alleged.
What specific mechanisms did he highlight to support that claim of transparency and rigor? How does it supposedly work?
He pointed to a couple of key things. First, the long history and established practice of sharing the electoral rolls with all recognized political parties. This isn't new. He noted it's been happening since 1960, providing decades of precedent for parties to scrutinize the lists.
Okay.
He also highlighted that the process includes specific periods and mechanisms for filing claims, objections, and appeals regarding the voter lists. This allows both parties and individual citizens to challenge or correct information they believe is wrong.
So based on those procedures,
Based on these established procedures and safeguards, he directly dismissed the accusations of data fudging. He stated pretty unequivocally that the Election Commission of India has robust mechanisms in place, mechanisms designed precisely to ensure the credibility and accuracy of the electoral rolls.
it's easy to forget sometimes just the sheer scale of organizing elections in India. I mean, the numbers are staggering.
They're almost mind-boggling, really. India's elections are arguably the largest democratic exercise on the planet. The logistical complexity is just immense.
Yeah.
Conducting these elections involves coordinating over 20 million personnel. That includes everyone from polling staff at the booths, security forces like police, official observers appointed by the commission, and also party agents representing all the different political parties right there at the polling stations.
20 million people.
20 million. All of this is necessary just to facilitate free and fair elections for nearly 1 billion eligible voters spread across the vast and incredibly diverse geography of the country. It's a monumental undertaking.
And how is that massive operation monitored? How do they try to ensure fairness and accuracy at every single step, with so many people and places involved?
Commissioner Kumar stressed that the process isn't conducted in some kind of vacuum. He highlighted the extensive monitoring by various stakeholders throughout the entire election cycle. He actually described them as acting like concurrent auditors.
Who are these auditors?
Well, it includes the political parties themselves and their representatives, the candidates contesting the elections, those officially appointed observers who oversee proceedings, and also the media, who report extensively on the process. Their active presence and their ability to scrutinize various stages from voter list preparation to polling day to counting are presented as critical checks and balances that help ensure the integrity of the final outcome.
Okay. And beyond its own domestic process, India also plays a role in election management globally, shares its experience.
Yes. Kumar also used the platform in Stockholm to highlight India's contribution to international election management. The Election Commission of India apparently shares its considerable expertise and experience through capacity-building programs for electoral bodies in various other countries.
Interesting.
And the fact that this Stockholm conference he attended drew over 100 representatives from 50 different nations indicates, the international community's interest in electoral integrity and presumably in learning from the experiences of large, complex democracies like India.
So his overall message at the conference was really a defense of India's system and its international standing in this area.
Exactly. His concluding remarks were clearly aimed at reaffirming global confidence in India's electoral process. By highlighting the established monitoring systems, the scale of the operation, he aimed to demonstrate that despite any domestic political allegations that might arise, the fundamental processes are designed to ensure fairness, accuracy, and integrity. His speech effectively sought to position India's electoral management not just as a functioning system, but as a global model of efficiency and trustworthiness on the international stage.
So what here is pretty fundamental. Electoral integrity is absolutely foundational to the legitimacy of any democracy, but especially in a country of India's sheer size and complexity.
It absolutely is.
Right.
And understanding the systems that are designed to ensure that integrity of the scale required, the different layers of monitoring that are supposedly in place, is crucial for anyone trying to understand Indian democracy. This becomes especially important in a political climate where questions or allegations about the process inevitably arise, as they do in many democracies. It just underscores that maintaining trust in democratic institutions is this ongoing effort. It requires transparency, robust safeguards, both in practice and in how they're communicated, both domestically and to the wider world.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears entirely now and move from India's national governance all the way across the globe to a political story unfolding in New York City. There's an Indian origin challenger making some significant waves in the mayoral race there.
Yes, this is quite an interesting development. New York State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani is emerging as a surprisingly strong challenger in the upcoming New York City mayoral race.
And who's he running against primarily?
He's taking on a very prominent and, established political figure, the former Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Cuomo, right. And Mamdani's political identity is quite distinct, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's not your typical mainstream Democrat.
No, he identifies openly as a democratic socialist. He's aligning himself very clearly with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, a wing that has seen increasing support and success in major American cities recently.
And he's gaining surprising traction, according to the latest polling data.
Absolutely surprising, yeah. The latest Progress Survey poll, which specifically surveys likely Democratic primary voters in New York City, shows that Mamdani has significantly narrowed the lead previously held by Andrew Cuomo.
How narrow?
Well, in the ranked choice voting system they use in the city's primaries, Mamdani initially trailed Cuomo by about 7 points. But get this, the most recent poll figures place Mamdani at 49% support compared to Cuomo's 51%.
Wow, that's incredibly close.
It is, and the poll apparently has a margin of error of 3 points. So statistically, that essentially makes it a tightly contested race. You could even say it's a statistical dead heat based on this one poll. It indicates things are extremely competitive right now.
His background is also quite notable, isn't it? His parentage.
Indeed. Zohran Mamdani is the son of two very well-known figures. His mother is the acclaimed Indian filmmaker Mira Nair, and his father is the renowned Ugandan Indian academic and scholar Mahmood Mamdani. So he comes from a family deeply involved in arts, academia, and social commentary.
What's been a key part of his campaign strategy? How is he taking on someone as established and, frankly, well-funded as Andrew Cuomo?
A central element of his campaign has been very direct and pointed criticism of the financial backing that Andrew Cuomo receives. He's framed the race quite effectively as a battle between, ordinary New Yorkers and entrenched wealthy interests.
He had a pretty sharp quote on that, didn't he? Something about billionaires.
Yes, he was quoted saying that billionaires are consolidating around Andrew Cuomo because they know he will preserve the broken status quo. That, quote, clearly positions his campaign as one advocating for fundamental systemic change, directly challenging the existing political and economic power structures in the city. It's a very clear message.
So his rising popularity is potentially signaling something broader about the political mood in New York City, more than just this one race.
It certainly could be. His unexpected surge in the polls definitely signals a potential desire for disruption within the traditional political establishment in New York City. It suggests that his progressive and democratic socialist message, focusing on issues like affordable housing, inequality, challenging wealthy donors, is resonating strongly with a significant segment of likely Democratic primary voters.
And the primary itself is very close now, right? When is it?
It is. The Democratic primary is rapidly approaching on June 24th. So the timing of this poll, showing him narrowing the gap so significantly just weeks before voting, is crucial. It indicates strong momentum heading into the final stretch of the campaign.
So what's the outlook? Could he actually pull this off?
Well, his ability to maintain and potentially even expand this level of support in the remaining time could indeed significantly impact the outcome of the mayoral race. If he continues this trajectory, his challenge could genuinely reshape expectations for the primary results. It could mark a really pivotal moment in New York City's political landscape, demonstrating the viability of a progressive challenger serially threatening a highly experienced and well-known political figure like Cuomo.
So what we hear is that while this is specifically about a local race in New York City, it really has broader implications, doesn't it? It taps into bigger themes.
Absolutely. It highlights some national, even international trends in politics, particularly the growing appeal of progressive or democratic socialist platforms in major urban centers. And it shows the potential power of underdog campaigns that effectively tap into voter discontent with the status quo. It demonstrates how identity, a clear message, and building momentum can combine to allow a relatively less-known figure to gain significant ground against a political heavyweight. It's kind of a microcosm of larger political shifts happening in various parts of the world, especially around questions of wealth inequality and the role of money in politics.
Okay. Moving from domestic politics in NYC back to South Asia, and a really complex international issue with significant environmental undertones. The challenges facing the Indus Waters Treaty between India and Pakistan.
Right. This treaty is a really crucial and quite old agreement. Signed way back in 1960, the Indus Waters Treaty, or IWT, basically regulates how India and Pakistan share and manage the water from the Indus River system, the Indus and its tributaries.
And given the history between those two countries.
Exactly. Given that India and Pakistan have such a long history of tension and conflict, this treaty has been absolutely vital for managing a shared, life-sustaining resource. It's often cited as one of the few examples of successful cooperation despite the political climate.
But it's currently under pressure from multiple fronts, it sounds like.
It is, yeah. The sources highlight two primary pressures, creating new, serious challenges for the treaty's longevity and its effectiveness going forward. First, you've got the long-standing geopolitical tensions between India and Pakistan, which flare up periodically.
Okay.
And second, layered on top of that, are the increasingly undeniable impacts of climate change on the river system itself.
Let's start with the geopolitical aspect mentioned in the sources. What specific incident was highlighted?
The sources note a specific instance that definitely escalated tensions recently. Following a terrorist attack in Kashmir that tragically killed 26 people, India took the step of suspending its participation in the treaty's regular meetings and also stopped sharing some hydrological data as stipulated by the treaty.
And that had an impact.
Oh, definitely. This unilateral action, while India framed it in the context of security concerns after the attack, significantly heightened existing anxieties and concerns in Pakistan, which is the downstream country, over their water security.
And how does Pakistan generally perceive any action by India that affects the flow of the Indus rivers? It must be incredibly sensitive.
It's incredibly sensitive. For Pakistan, which is heavily reliant on the Indus River system for its agriculture, its economy, its basic needs, any attempt by India, the upstream country, to control or withhold Indus water is viewed as a serious provocation. Water has always been a potential flashpoint in India-Pakistan relations, given the history and the vital nature of the resource.
Okay, so you have that political tension. Now, layer climate change on top of that. Was this 65-year-old treaty designed to handle the kind of environmental changes we're seeing now?
Absolutely not. Not even close. The treaty was designed based on historical hydrological data from the mid-20th century, assuming a relatively stable and predictable climate. But the Indus River system originates high up in the Hindu Kush Himalayas.
Right.
And this region is experiencing significant warming due to global climate change. Climate scientists are issuing some really stark warnings about this region.
What kind of warnings?
Well, projections suggest that glacier loss in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region could be as high as two-thirds by the end of this century. By 2100,
Wow.
this isn't just some abstract geological event. It has profound implications for the entire river system. It fundamentally alters the timing and the volume of water flows throughout the year.
How specifically does that impact the river flow and therefore the treaty, which is based on dividing that flow?
Well, think about it. Reduced snowfall in winter and faster melting of the remaining glaciers in warmer months could shift the timing of the peak river discharge much earlier in the year. Traditionally, the peak flows would come during the monsoon season or the main summer melt, providing water when it's most needed for irrigation during the growing season. If that peak discharge happens much earlier, maybe in spring, it completely disrupts the traditional irrigation cycles that millions of farmers on both sides of the border rely on. The river's flow becomes less predictable, more volatile. You could potentially get higher flood risks early in the season, followed by more severe water scarcity later on. This kind of dynamic variability is something the fixed, percentage-based allocations in the treaty were simply not designed to handle.
So the treaty basically needs to become more flexible, more adaptive to deal with these dynamic conditions. It can't just be based on old assumptions.
That's precisely what the experts cited in the sources are advocating for. They argue strongly that the IWT needs to be revised, or at least supplemented, to incorporate what they call dynamic water management strategies. Strategies that can actually adapt to the changing environmental realities on the ground.
What kind of tools or approaches would that involve? How would you make it dynamic?
They specifically suggest using advanced tools like satellite data. You could use satellites for much improved monitoring of things like snow cover, glacier melt rates, and real-time river flow across the basin.
Right.
This kind of data, shared between the countries, could help both sides predict water shortages more accurately, maybe anticipate floods better, and potentially adjust water allocations based on actual conditions rather than just fixed historical averages. The idea is to move away from those rigid, fixed allocations and towards a system that's more responsive, ensuring more equitable and efficient use of a resource that's becoming increasingly unpredictable and potentially scarcer overall.
But revising a foundational treaty like this between India and Pakistan, especially on such a sensitive issue as water, sounds incredibly challenging politically. What are the main obstacles?
You hit the nail on the head. The source notes practical hurdles like who pays for and manages these sophisticated shared monitoring systems, their funding constraints. But arguably, the single most significant obstacle is the deep-rooted, pervasive political mistrust between India and Pakistan. That lack of trust makes meaningful dialogue, negotiation, and reaching any kind of consensus on revising a critical treaty extremely difficult. Even when the mutual benefits of adapting to climate change might seem clear from a purely scientific or technical standpoint.
And recent actions haven't helped build trust.
No, India's recent actions, like suspending the hydrological data sharing, unfortunately exacerbate this distrust and increase the uncertainty in Pakistan regarding its downstream water availability. The report also mentions that India is reportedly planning some sediment flushing operations from dams on its side. Depending on how that's managed and communicated, it could easily be perceived negatively downstream and potentially escalate tensions further.
So the long-term perspective here is that without adaptation, without finding some way to update it, the treaty itself risks becoming obsolete, irrelevant to the actual conditions.
That's the strong warning coming from the experts. They argue that the IWT absolutely must evolve. It needs to transition from being primarily a rigid political agreement focused on fixed historical allocations to becoming a much more flexible, environmentally responsive treaty, one that acknowledges and actively adapts to the realities of climate change.
And the alternative?
They caution that ignoring the need for these updates, especially as climate change impacts intensify year after year, could render the treaty effectively obsolete. It would just no longer reflect the conditions it was meant to govern. And the consequences of that obsolescence would be severe. It would jeopardize regional water security, potentially leading to increased competition, friction, maybe even conflict over a scarce essential resource. That would undermine stability for millions upon millions of people in both countries who depend entirely on the Indus River system for their livelihoods and, frankly, their survival.
So what here goes far beyond just international law or environmental science, does that?
Absolutely. It's a really potent, real-world example of how massive global challenges like climate change intersect directly with complex, long-standing geopolitical rivalries. The future of the Indus Waters Treaty isn't just some technical or legal issue for diplomats to sort out. It's a critical test of whether two nuclear-armed neighbors can find common ground, build trust, and adapt collaboratively to shared existential environmental threats. It highlights this incredibly delicate balance between national interests, shared resources, and the potential for regional peace or conflict.
Sobering stuff. Okay, shifting focus again, this time to India's domestic economy, and what sounds like a particularly bright spot in the agriculture sector. There's significant news regarding the country's food grain stocks.
Yes, the numbers released regarding India's government-held food grain reserves, specifically as of June 1st, are quite impressive. They really speak to a successful recent agricultural season and a very effective government procurement effort.
What are those headline numbers? How much grain are we talking about?
Okay, so for rice, government stocks hit a record high of 59.5 million metric tons. That's a huge amount. It's up 18% compared to the same time last year.
And how does that compare to the target?
What's remarkable is how far this exceeds the strategic target. The July 1st operational and strategic target for rice is just 13.5 million tons. So they have, what, more than 4 times the target amount? The buffer is enormous.
Wow. And wheat.
Wheat stocks are also looking very healthy. They reached a 4-year high at 36.9 million metric tons.
And is that also above the target level?
Yes, comfortably so. The government's wheat target for this time of year is around 27.6 million tons. So for both major staple grains, rice, and wheat, India is sitting on very ample reserves right now.
What's the main reason cited for this significant surge in inventory? Good harvest, good buying.
The sources attribute this increase primarily to improved procurement from farmers. It seems government agencies, particularly the Food Corporation of India, the FCI, have been very successful in purchasing grains directly from farmers at the minimum support prices during the recent harvest season. This indicates both a strong harvest overall and effective government buying operations managing to secure that grain.
And what does having such high domestic stocks mean for the country's overall food security?
Well, fundamentally, it ensures a stable supply of rice and wheat throughout the country. This is absolutely critical for food security in a nation the size of India. It allows the government to effectively manage its massive public distribution systems, which provide subsidized food to millions, and also to intervene in the open market if necessary to prevent shortages or sudden price spikes. It provides a significant cushion.
Now, India is also the world's largest rice exporter. How do these record reserves impact its role in the global market? Can they export more?
They certainly could. These record rice reserves definitely position India strongly to enhance global shipments. The source notes that India had previously imposed some export restrictions on certain types of rice back in 2022, mainly to ensure domestic supply was sufficient.
Right.
However, they apparently lifted the last remaining curbs on rice exports back in March 2025. So, with such massive stocks now available, India has the capacity to play a very significant role in supplying the international rice market. This could potentially influence global prices and availability, depending on how much they decide to release.
Okay, what about the domestic impact of the high wheat stocks? What does that allow the government to do?
The growing wheat inventories provide the government with significant flexibility to stabilize domestic prices. If market prices for wheat start to rise too quickly, the government can release grain from its reserves through open market sales schemes. This increases the supply available in the market and helps to keep prices in check for consumers and bulk buyers like flour mills.
Does this affect India's need for wheat imports? I recall there had been some talk about potential imports recently because of poorer harvests in previous years.
Yes, this is a key point mentioned. Having these higher domestic wheat stock levels means that India is now considered unlikely to require imports this year. That speculation about needing to import wheat arose because harvests in the preceding 3 years had been somewhat impacted by adverse weather events, like heat waves.
Okay.
But the successful procurement this season, with the FCI apparently securing 30 million metric tons of wheat directly from farmers, the most in 4 years, means domestic needs are well covered. There's ample supply for the public distribution system and also for sale to bulk consumers during the lean season when fresh grain isn't entering the market. So no imports needed, it seems.
So it sounds like mostly very good news, securing food supplies, stabilizing prices, potentially boosting exports. But the sources do mention a potential challenge or a word of warning, specifically regarding the enormous rice stocks.
They do. While having a substantial buffer is definitely good, experts are cautioning that the rice stocks are now accumulating beyond ideal levels. You know, holding excessive inventory beyond what's needed for strategic reserves comes with significant costs.
Like what?
Storage costs, for one. Maintaining huge stockpiles requires infrastructure and management. There's also the potential risk of spoilage if the grain isn't managed perfectly over time. And fundamentally, it ties up resources, both the grain itself and the capital used to procure it, that could potentially be used elsewhere.
So what are the experts recommending? Just sell it off?
They're specifically urging the government to actively work on reducing this excess inventory before the next major rice purchasing season begins in October. They need to clear storage space and manage the existing stock efficiently to make way for the new crop.
What are some potential ways the government could manage this surplus effectively? What are the options?
Well, if the stocks persist at these high levels, India might explore options like providing export incentives to make Indian rice even more competitive on the international market, encouraging larger sales abroad. Or they could implement additional domestic distribution measures, perhaps beyond the standard public distribution system, to move more grain through internal markets, maybe at subsidized rates for certain groups or industries. The overall goal is to optimize stock management, finding that right balance between having sufficient strategic reserves for food security and avoiding the costs and challenges associated with holding truly excessive amounts of grain.
Okay. So is that these impressive figures are a clear indicator of recent agricultural success and effective government procurement.
Exactly. They reflect a strong harvest and successful government operations in buying that grain from farmers. This significantly strengthens India's domestic food security, provides a vital buffer against future weather shocks or market volatility, and also positions India prominently in the global grain market, particularly for rice. However, the challenge now really shifts from accumulation to efficient management, ensuring the surplus is handled effectively to avoid waste and unnecessary costs, thereby maximizing the benefits of this abundant supply for everyone.
Okay, now let's turn to a story that is deeply unsettling and tragic, the Meghalaya honeymoon murder plot. This sounds horrific.
This is a truly shocking and disturbing case that has come to light, uncovered by police in the northeastern state of Meghalaya. It involves an alleged plot where a woman is accused of orchestrating the murder of her own husband during their honeymoon.
Just awful. Who are the individuals involved, according to the sources, the names?
The victim is named as the husband, Raja Raghuvanshi. The alleged perpetrator, the one accused of masterminding the plot, is his wife, Sonam Raghuvanshi.
How did the authorities first become suspicious? How did they realize this wasn't just a missing person case or, a tragic accident?
The initial clue that really raised suspicions and proved critical was the discovery of Sonam's Mangalsutra and her wedding ring. These were found abandoned at a homestay in Sora, a town where the couple had stayed.
And the Mangalsutra is?
A Mangalsutra is a sacred necklace worn by married Hindu women. It's a very important symbol of their marital status. Finding these deeply personal, significant items just left behind, coupled with her subsequent disappearance, immediately raised huge red flags for the police. It led them to view her as the prime suspect almost immediately, rather than assuming she was a grieving wife or also missing.
Let's try to reconstruct the timeline of events as recorded in the sources. When did this happen?
Okay, according to the investigation details that have been released, Raja and Sonam were married in Indore, which is in central India, on May 11th. They then traveled to Meghalaya for their honeymoon, arriving there on May 20th. They apparently checked into a homestay in Sora, left their main suitcase there, and then went for a trek to a nearby village called Nongriat, which is famous for its living root bridges, sort of typical tourist activity.
Right.
Then, on May 23rd, after checking out from the homestay where they'd left the luggage, they returned to the town of Sora. But from there, instead of traveling onward, as one might expect, they headed towards Waisadong Falls, which is another scenic, somewhat remote location. And this is where the horrific crime allegedly took place.
And the source states the murder occurred while Sonam, the wife, was actually present.
Yes, the investigation details released so far indicate that Raja Raghuvanshi was brutally murdered at Waisadong Falls, allegedly by 3 contract killers who had been hired. And crucially, the report states this murder happened in her presence.
And after the murder, Sonam just disappeared.
She did. She vanished from Meghalaya immediately after the alleged crime. Investigators eventually tracked her down nearly 1,200 kilometers away. She had resurfaced in Ghazipur, a city in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh.
And that's where she was apprehended. Or did she turn herself in?
She reportedly surrendered to the police in Ghazipur. Following her surrender, the police then made further crucial arrests. They apprehended her alleged boyfriend, who was identified as Raj Kushwaha, and importantly, they also arrested the 3 individuals believed to be the hired killers who actually carried out the murder.
So those arrests confirmed it was premeditated.
Exactly. These subsequent arrests, according to the sources, were key because they confirmed the premeditated nature of the murder. It suggested this wasn't some impulsive act of violence, but a carefully planned plot.
And the investigation revealed this was planned before the honeymoon even started.
Yes. Investigators have revealed that the entire plot to murder Raja was allegedly planned by Sonam and her boyfriend, Raj Kushwaha, before they even embarked on the honeymoon trip to Meghalaya. The intention, reportedly, was to try and stage the crime to look like an accident, perhaps a fall at the waterfall, given the location.
Just chilling. When was Raj's body eventually discovered? It wasn't found right away.
No, Raja's body was not found immediately after the alleged murder on May 23rd. It was discovered significantly later, on June 2nd, located in a gorge near Waisadong Falls. The discovery of the body likely intensified the investigation significantly and led to the unraveling of the plot.
What is the current legal status of Sonam and the others who were arrested?
A court in Shillong, the capital of Meghalaya, has formally placed Sonam and her alleged accomplices, including her boyfriend and the 3 suspected hired killers, under an 8-day police remand. This allows the police more time to question them further, gather evidence, and continue piecing together the full details of the conspiracy.
How has the public reacted to the unfolding details of this truly horrifying case?
Well, as you can imagine, the case has sparked widespread outrage across India. The sheer nature of the crime, a murder allegedly orchestrated by a spouse on their honeymoon involving hired killers, is particularly shocking and has captured national attention. The source mentions that political figures have also publicly commented on the case, which highlights the level of public and political attention it has garnered.
And the investigation is ongoing.
Yes. Authorities have stated they are continuing to meticulously piece together the full extent of the conspiracy, aiming to ensure that everyone involved is brought to justice for this brutal and calculated crime.
The so what here, it goes so far beyond a simple crime report. It's a story that really speaks to a darker side of human relationships and intentions, doesn't it?
It truly is. This is a deeply disturbing narrative of extreme betrayal and premeditated violence happening within what should have been a period of celebration and intimacy, a honeymoon. It starkly highlights the grim reality that things like contract killings exist, and the lengths to which individuals can apparently go, driven by motives we can only speculate on at this stage. The case also underscores the crucial, often difficult work of police investigators in uncovering complex plots, navigating deception, and seeking justice for victims. It really reveals some of the hidden, darker aspects of human behavior that are thankfully rare, but incredibly jarring when they surface like this.
Yeah, absolutely jarring. Okay, finally, let's conclude our deep dive today by looking at a critical public health issue in India, the problem of excessive salt consumption.
Right, and this is a major health challenge with really significant widespread implications for the population. Experts estimate that excessive salt consumption is linked to a truly staggering number of deaths annually in India. The figure cited is approximately 175,000 deaths each year are attributed to hypertension-related complications, high blood pressure issues resulting directly from high salt intake.
175,000 deaths. That's a massive number.
Mm.
Where is the majority of this excessive salt intake coming from? Is it mostly from, processed foods and snacks?
Well, while processed foods definitely contribute, the sources indicate that the primary source for most Indians is actually quite surprising to many people. An estimated 80% of India's salt intake comes directly from home-cooked meals.
80% from home cooking.
80%. This means the salt added during the cooking process itself, and often additional salt that people sprinkle on their food at the table before eating, constitutes the vast majority of their daily consumption. It suggests it's less about packaged snacks or restaurant food being the dominant factor, and more about daily cooking and eating habits at home.
And how does the average daily salt intake in India compare to what global health organizations recommend?
The comparison is quite stark and frankly very concerning. The average daily salt intake among Indians is reported to be over 12 grams per day. That's the average.
Okay.
In contrast, the World Health Organization, WHO, recommends a maximum daily intake of just 5 grams per day for adults.
5 grams. So on average, Indians are consuming more than double, sometimes almost triple, the recommended healthy limit.
Exactly. Way over the limit on average.
And the health risks associated with consuming salt at that level are severe. We mentioned hypertension.
Absolutely severe. This excessive sodium intake is a major driver of hypertension or high blood pressure. And hypertension, in turn, significantly increases the risks of developing serious cardiovascular problems like heart disease and stroke, as well as chronic kidney disorders. These conditions are already leading causes of premature death and disability in India, and high salt intake is a key contributing factor.
There's also a point in the sources about different types of salt. People sometimes think pink salt or sea salt is better.
Yes, that's a common perception, and the sources address it. There's often this idea floating around that alternative salts, things like pink Himalayan salt, rock salt, or sea salt, are somehow healthier options than regular table salt.
Right.
But Dr. Ritika Samadar, who is a chief clinical nutritionist quoted in the source, clarified this directly. She stated that while these salts might have different trace minerals or look different, they contain similar sodium levels as regular iodized table salt. The core issue for health isn't the color or origin, it's the sodium content. And sodium levels are pretty much the same across the board.
That's important.
And she also, importantly, stressed the need to use iodized salt because iodine is an essential micronutrient, particularly for thyroid function. Not all of these alternative or specialty salts are fortified with iodine, so relying on them exclusively could lead to iodine deficiency, which is another public health concern. So sticking with iodized salt, but using less of it is generally the advice.
Okay. So given the scale of the problem, 175,000 deaths, intake double the recommendation. What are health experts recommending? What needs to be done to tackle this?
Well, experts who participated in a national workshop on this issue, which was held in collaboration with the global public health initiative Resolve to Save Lives, called for a multifaceted, comprehensive approach. You can't just tackle this with one silver bullet. Their recommendations focused on three key areas: the need for early intervention, much wider consumer education, and crucially, significant regulatory reforms in the food sector.
What about early intervention? What does that mean?
Dr. Vijay Kher, another expert quoted, specifically advocated for a strategy of starting low-salt diets much earlier in childhood. The idea is that taste preferences are largely developed when we're young. So, by adapting children's palates to enjoy food with less salt from an early age, it could become a natural, healthier habit that carries through their whole life. This could potentially help bring down that very high adult average intake in future generations.
Makes sense. And what specific policy recommendations came out of this workshop? What should the government be doing?
The experts put forward several concrete policy ideas aimed at reducing salt intake at a population level beyond just individual education. These included implementing mandatory front-of-package warning labels on processed food products that are high in salt, sugar, or unhealthy fats. The idea is to make it much easier for consumers to quickly identify unhealthy options when they're shopping.
Like traffic light labels, perhaps.
Something like that, yeah. They also suggested the possibility of using taxation on unhealthy foods, particularly those very high in salt, as a potential disincentive for consumption, while maybe generating revenue that could be used for public health initiatives. And stricter advertising regulations were also recommended, particularly targeting products high in salt, sugar, or fat that are heavily marketed towards children to try and prevent the early development of unhealthy taste preferences through aggressive marketing.
Now, India has actually set a national target for reducing salt consumption, hasn't it? There's an official goal.
Yes, that's right. India has made a commitment, on paper at least, to reduce average salt consumption by 30% by the year 2030. This target aligns with the World Health Organization's Global Action Plan for Preventing and Controlling Non-Communicable Diseases, where reducing excessive salt intake is recognized as a key, cost-effective, modifiable risk factor.
But are they on track? What are the main challenges hindering India from actually achieving that 30% reduction goal by 2030?
Well, despite having the clear target and acknowledging the health risks, the sources point out some significant hurdles remain. There is currently, apparently, a lack of a national salt reduction policy, a single, clear, coordinated, and comprehensive strategy that brings together different sectors like health, the food industry, education, agriculture. Existing regulations related to food composition and labeling regarding salt content are also described as generally weak, which makes effective monitoring and enforcement difficult. And critically, despite the fact that 80% of intake comes from home cooking, there's still relatively low public awareness about the specific dangers of excessive salt consumption and, importantly, practical, easy ways for people to reduce it in their everyday meals without sacrificing taste entirely.
So there's an urgency here.
Absolutely. Given the magnitude of hypertension and related health problems in India, the experts quoted are urging immediate steps to overcome these challenges. They emphasize the need for stronger policy frameworks, much more effective and widespread public health campaigns, and real collaboration between government agencies, the food industry, which has a big role to play, and civil society organizations to prevent these health trends from worsening and to actively promote a healthier dietary culture across the entire nation.
So what here is crystal clear. This isn't just a matter of individual dietary choice or, personal taste preference. It's a major, largely preventable public health crisis that is affecting hundreds of thousands of lives every single year in India.
Precisely. And it highlights the absolute need for systemic intervention. Because such a huge proportion of the salt intake comes from home cooking and culturally ingrained habits, addressing this requires much more than just putting warning labels on packaged goods, although that's part of it. It necessitates widespread, sustained public education campaigns that really resonate with people. It might even involve exploring options for influencing food formulations, maybe even for basic ingredients like salt itself, or promoting lower sodium alternatives. And it definitely requires strong policy support to shift a deeply ingrained cultural dietary habit at a massive population level.
Yeah.
It's a really complex challenge, no doubt, requiring action on multiple fronts, from policymakers and food producers right down to individuals making choices in their own kitchens every day.
Wow. We've certainly covered a remarkable breadth of topics in this deep dive into just a single day's headlines relating to India. We've looked at the intense drama of international cricket and that very personal story of a star bowler's resilience. The long-term demographic shifts shaping the nation's future population structure, the systems and the defense of electoral integrity in such a vast democracy, that surprising political challenge unfolding across the world in New York City involving an Indian origin candidate.
Right, the Mamdani race.
The incredibly complex intersection of climate change and geopolitical tension threatening a vital water treaty, the positive news of abundant food grain stocks, but also the challenge of managing that surplus, and finally, that shocking true crime story alongside this critical widespread public health issue of salt consumption.
It truly demonstrates how a collection of sources, even just focusing on news from around a single day, can offer these really detailed and often interconnected insights. You see the different layers, national dynamics, international relations, significant societal trends that play out over decades. And you also get these glimpses into both the most disturbing and sometimes the most resilient aspects of the human experience. Looking at them all together definitely provides a much richer, more nuanced understanding than just reading those headlines in isolation.
Yeah, it really makes you step back and think about how these seemingly disparate events might actually connect, or how they reflect larger patterns, or perhaps highlight these persistent challenges that nations and individuals grapple with constantly.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with some pretty complex questions to ponder, doesn't it? I mean, if we consider the challenges facing the Indus Waters Treaty, you've got this long-standing agreement, crucial for stability, now under immense pressure from climate change, something it wasn't designed for, and overlaid with this deep political distrust.
Right.
And then you think about the public health crisis of excessive salt consumption, which requires changing deeply ingrained individual behaviors and cultural norms, likely through a combination of policy, education, and industry changes. What does that juxtaposition tell us about the most effective way for a country, any country really, to tackle a complex, long-term systemic challenge? You know, one where individual actions, massive environmental forces, historical context, and political will all intersect and often pull in different directions. How do you actually drive fundamental change in the face of such multi-layered obstacles? It's a question that applies, I think, to many of the issues we've touched on today, issues that impact both individual lives profoundly and the functioning of the state itself, something for you to mull over.
A powerful thought to leave with indeed.
No.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.